Hey guys, glad you could make it. Tonight, we're journeying back to the mid-14th century, a time of profound faith, stark contrasts, and unprecedented catastrophe. We're not heading to a battlefield or a royal court, but into the heart of a European town gripped by the most devastating pandemic in human history, the Black Death. And we're going to listen. Listen to the sound that marked its relentless, terrifying progress. The church bells. We often think of medieval church bells as cheerful calls to prayer, marking the peaceful rhythm of daily life. But the brutal reality during the plague years was that these bells transformed into instruments of dread. Their constant frantic tolling became the soundtrack of death itself, measuring not the hours of the day, but the mounting toll of the dead, driving people to madness, and ultimately falling silent as there was no one left strong enough to ring them. If these slow journeys into the sounds and sorrows of the past help you find a moment of quiet reflection in your own world, a simple like or a subscribe is always a wonderful and deeply appreciated signal. It truly helps this channel find its way. And as our community continues to gather from all corners of the globe, it's always fascinating to see who is joining us. So please feel free to share where you're listening from as you settle in for the night. Alright, it's time to let the anxieties of the present day recede. Find that perfect, comfortable position. Let your body feel heavy and completely supported. Take a slow, deep breath in. Feel the stillness. And let it all flow out. Good. The year is 1348. The place is a bustling port town in southern France, perhaps Marseille or Montpellier. You are Guillaume, a merchant dealing in fine wool, a man of moderate means and predictable habits, and the whispers, carried on the salty sea breeze, have begun. Your world, until now, has unfolded to a steady, comforting beat, a rhythm largely dictated by the great bronze bells hanging high in the stone tower of Saint-Michel, the town's principal church. Their voices are the town's shared language, marking time, calling to worship, celebrating joys and mourning losses. You wake before dawn to the distant, solemn sound of matins, the first call to prayer for the monks and devout laity. The clearer, more insistent ringing for lords greets the sunrise, a signal for the workday to begin in earnest. Throughout the morning, the bells mark the little hours, prime, terce, sext, reminders to pause for a brief prayer, though for merchants like you, engrossed in the tangible world of commerce, these might often pass unheeded, mere punctuation in a busy day. Sext, ringing out at midday, signals the time for the main meal, a welcome respite from the heat and hustle of the marketplace or the counting house. The afternoon hours of nones and vespers guide the latter part of the workday, their resonant tones echoing over the rooftops as shadows lengthen. Finally, Compline rings out after sunset, the last prayer, the signal to bank the fires, secure the doors, and prepare for rest. These sounds are woven so deeply into the fabric of your life, into the very air you breathe, that you rarely consciously register them. They are the auditory landscape, the reliable, unchanging pulse of a world governed by God, and the predictable cycle of the sun. Even the less frequent tolls, the joyous pealing for a wedding, the urgent clanging that signals a fire, the slow single toll of the passing bell, are part of this accepted order, marking the significant but expected events of human existence within a divinely ordained framework. But recently, the rhythm has felt off, subtly at first, then with growing insistence. The source is the harbour, the town's gateway to the wider world, the source of its prosperity, and now, the source of a creeping unease. Ships arrive, as they always do, great wooden vessels with patched sails, carrying wine from Italy, spices from the Levant, tin from England. But the sailors, they seem different. Their usual boisterous energy is muted. They gather in taverns near the docks, their voices low, their eyes wide with something more than just the exhaustion of a long voyage. You overhear snippets of conversation as you negotiate for dock space for your wool shipments. They speak of a great sickness in the east, Constantinople, Messina, Genoa, Venice, ports falling silent, marketplaces emptying, death stalking the streets with terrifying speed. They describe the symptoms in crude, fearful detail. Sudden, raging fevers that leave a man delirious. Swellings, hard and painful, appearing in the groin, the armpits, the neck. Swellings the size of an apple or an egg, dark and discoloured. Dark spots appearing on the skin, like bruises. And then, death. Swift, inexorable, often within 3 or 4 days, sometimes overnight. They tell tales that sound like nightmares. Ships found adrift at sea. Their entire crews dead at the oars or in their bunks. Eerie ghost vessels carrying their invisible lethal cargo from port to port. You listen, a knot tightening in your stomach, but you try to rationalize. Sailors are prone to exaggeration. The East is distant, foreign, prone to strange afflictions. Surely such a thing could not happen here, in your prosperous, well-ordered Christian town. It is unthinkable. A story to frighten children, perhaps, not a reality to concern a respectable wool merchant. Then the unthinkable arrives, not with a sudden clap of thunder, but with a quiet, insidious seep. It begins, as these things often do, down by the docks, in the crowded, unsanitary alleys, where the transient population of sailors, stevedores, and beggars live cheek by jowl. A dock worker named Pierre, known for his prodigious strength and equally prodigious thirst, finishes unloading a Genoese galley laden with silks and spices. He complains of a sudden headache, a bone-deep weariness. He stumbles home to his small room near the harbour, shivering despite the afternoon heat. His wife finds him delirious, burning with fever. That night, she discovers the swellings, the buboes, hard and exquisitely tender, in his groin. He speaks of rats, of being bitten while working in the ship's hold, but his words are disjointed, nonsensical. By morning, Pierre is dead. His death is noted, perhaps, but not yet alarming. Dock workers live hard lives. Sudden illnesses are not uncommon. But then, a few days later, his wife collapses while drawing water from the public well. The same fever, the same telltale swellings. She dies even more quickly. Her 2 younger relatives, living in the same cramped room, follow soon after. A pattern begins to emerge. A terrifying, invisible thread connecting these sudden deaths. Fear, no longer a distant rumour, but a cold, tangible presence, starts to grip the neighbourhood by the harbour. People begin to avoid the alley where Pierre lived. They hurry past the public well his wife used. They look at the Genoese galley, still tied up at the quay, with a new, fearful suspicion. Was it carrying more than just silk? The town physician, Master Arnaud, a man whose academic robes and solemn pronouncements command respect, is summoned. He examines the bodies, his brow furrowed in concentration. He consults his vellum-bound copies of Avicenna and Galen. He speaks learnedly of the 4 humours, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, and how this sickness must represent a catastrophic imbalance, likely caused by corrupted air, a miasma. He postulates that perhaps noxious vapours released by recent earthquakes in the east, or an unfavourable alignment of Mars, Jupiter and Saturn, have poisoned the very atmosphere. His diagnosis is erudite, based on the best medical science of the age, and utterly wrong. He prescribes bleeding, purging, the application of poultices made from figs and cooked onions mixed with yeast and butter to draw out the poison from the buboes. These treatments are painful, debilitating, and completely ineffective against the bacterial onslaught raging within the victims' bodies. Then the sound cuts through the growing anxiety. The great tenor bell of Saint Michel begins to toll, a single slow, deliberate stroke, echoing across the rooftops. Dong. A pause. Dong. Another pause. Dong. The passing bell. It announces the death of Pierre's wife, calling the faithful to pray for her soul's passage. It's a sound heavy with sorrow, but still familiar, still part of the town's accepted rituals. But the next day, it tolls again. Dong, 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 for her young relatives. The day after, it tolls for a sailor found dead on another ship. Then for a beggar who collapsed in the fish market. The intervals between the tolling grow shorter. The sombre single notes begin to weave themselves into the daily soundscape, a recurring mournful motif. You hear it as you check the quality of a new batch of fleece in your warehouse. You hear it as you share a cup of wine with a fellow merchant. Dong, dong, dong. It is no longer just a call for prayers for the departed. It is starting to feel like a relentless, ominous countdown. Each toll marks another breach in the town's defences, another victory for the invisible enemy. The fear is no longer confined to the dockside alleys. It begins to creep uptown, into the respectable streets, into the homes of merchants like yourself, into the cloistered walls of the monasteries, even into the bishop's palace. A weaver in your street falls ill, then his entire family. A wealthy moneylender, known for his robust health, complains of a sudden chill, and is dead within 3 days. The sickness seems to leap invisibly, unpredictably, respecting no boundaries of wealth or piety. The terrifying randomness of its spread fuels the panic. Why him? Why her? Why not me? Yet, people begin to look for patterns, for explanations, however irrational. Was it the stray dog that lingers near the butcher shop? Was it the suspicious-looking pilgrim who passed through last week? Was it the fault of the poor, whose supposed sinfulness has brought God's wrath upon the entire town? The authorities try to respond, their actions a mixture of genuine concern and utter bewilderment. The bishop orders daily masses, special prayers beseeching the mercy of God and the intercession of Saint Roch, the patron saint against plague. Great religious processions are organised. The town's holiest relics are paraded through the streets, accompanied by chanting priests and crowds of terrified citizens, hoping this display of collective piety will appease the heavens. But these gatherings, these crowds pressing close together, breathing the same air, likely serve only to spread the contagion further. People seek solace in the church, confessing their sins, receiving communion, desperately trying to prepare their souls for a death that seems increasingly inevitable. But the church itself, filled with the sick, the dying, and the terrified healthy, becomes an unintended incubator of the very pestilence they are praying to escape. You see fewer and fewer priests on the streets. Father Michel, your own parish priest, a kind man who has buried your parents and baptized your younger relative, is reported to be gravely ill. And the bells, oh, the bells, they seem to ring constantly now. The solemn, single death knell is overwhelmed. Often, multiple bells are rung together, a frantic, clanging, dissonant chorus that speaks not of solemn passage, but of sheer, unadulterated panic. The ringers are working in shifts, pulling the heavy ropes until their hands are raw, their bodies exhausted. The sound hammers at your skull, day and night. It is the first thing you hear when you wake. The last thing you hear as you fall is to a fitful, nightmare-ridden sleep. It is the sound of the town screaming. Dong, clang, dong, clang. It follows you into your warehouse, where the unsold bales of wool sit like silent accusations of a world where commerce no longer matters. It follows you into your home, where you look at the pale, frightened faces of your family and feel a cold, sickening helplessness. The bells are no longer marking time. They are annihilating it, compressing all of life into a single terrifying present moment of death. Practical measures intensify, driven by the persistent belief in miasma, the corrupted air. The town council orders sanitation efforts on an unprecedented scale. Street cleaners are hired, or rather conscripted from the ranks of the desperate poor, to remove the piles of refuse that normally fester in the alleys. Stray dogs and cats are rounded up and killed, believed to be carriers of the bad air. Barrels of vinegar are placed at crossroads, their sharp fumes thought to purify the atmosphere. Fires burn constantly in the squares, not just of aromatic woods now, but of anything that will produce smoke. Old rags, sulphur, even damp straw, filling the town with a thick, choking, and utterly ineffective haze. You find yourself participating in these rituals, burning juniper branches in your own hearth, keeping your windows tightly shut, even in the stifling heat, avoiding the supposedly dangerous night air. People adopt increasingly elaborate personal precautions. You carry a pomander, a small metal ball filled with pungent herbs and spices, ambergris, cloves, camphor, which you hold constantly to your nose when you must venture outside. It does little to filter the air, but the strong scent offers a psychological shield, a small bubble of personal fragrance against the surrounding stench of fear and, increasingly, of death. Physicians adopt their own, now infamous, protective costumes. They wear long, waxed leather gowns, gloves, and a bizarre bird-like mask with a long beak filled with aromatic herbs. This startling attire is intended to protect them from the miasma, but its terrifying appearance likely does more to frighten their patients than to ward off the plague. It's a world grasping at straws, employing folk remedies and flawed medical theories against an enemy operating on principles they cannot even begin to comprehend. The real culprits, the bacterium Yersinia pestis, carried by fleas on the backs of rats, move through the town unseen, unstoppable, utterly indifferent to the smell of burning tar or rosemary. The sheer number of deaths begins to break the town's ability to cope. The graveyards, usually serene plots surrounding the church, are filled beyond capacity. Bodies lie unburied in homes for days because the official corpse bearers, often drawn from the lowest rungs of society and offered hazard pay, are either dead themselves or have fled in terror. New burial grounds must be hastily consecrated outside the town walls. But even these are quickly overwhelmed. The solution is grimly pragmatic. Plague pits. Huge, deep trenches are dug, often using conscripted labour. Bodies are brought to these pits at night, piled onto crude carts pulled by mournful-looking oxen, or even by men themselves. You hear the rumble of the death cart in the street outside your window late at night. You hear the coarse shouts of the collectors. Bring out your dead. It is a sound that chills you to the bone. You do not look. You cannot bear to see the reality. The anonymous bundles wrapped in shrouds, the stiff limbs, the sheer horrifying volume of death being hauled away like garbage. The bodies are tumbled into the pits, sometimes hundreds at a time, often without coffins, without priests, without the proper rites. A thin layer of quicklime might be scattered over them to hasten decomposition and perhaps reduce the stench, then a layer of earth before the next layer of bodies begins. Dignity in death becomes a luxury the town can no longer afford. The bells might still be ringing, a frantic, desperate sound, but they are ringing for a harvest of death so vast that individual mourning has become impossible. The sound is no longer a lament. It is a mechanical, almost industrial processing of loss on an unimaginable scale. The incessant ringing, it starts to wear on the sanity of the living. Imagine the sound, hour after hour, day after relentless day. The constant metallic reminder that people are dying all around you. That death is not just possible, but probable, imminent. It becomes a form of psychological torture. People can't sleep. They can't think. The sound magnifies their fear, their grief, their helplessness. It hammers home the message that the world is ending, that God's judgment is at hand. You find yourself starting at sudden noises, your nerves frayed, your sleep shattered by imagined bells tolling in the silence. In some afflicted towns, driven to desperation, the authorities take the radical step of silencing the bells. An ordinance might be passed. No more death knells. Let the dead go unannounced. Let the living have some peace. The silence, when it falls, is shocking. The absence of the familiar sound is as noticeable, as jarring as its presence had been. It creates a different kind of dread, a feeling of being cut off, abandoned. Has the town simply given up? Has God? Or does the silence mean something even worse? Does it mean there are no healthy bell ringers left? In many places, this becomes the grim reality. The task of ringing the heavy church bells requires strength and stamina. The bell ringers, often monks or lay clerks living in close quarters, are themselves highly vulnerable to the contagion. One by one, they fall ill. Replacements are hard to find. Who would volunteer for a job that involves climbing a cramped, possibly contaminated bell tower multiple times a day? Eventually, the ropes fall still. Not because of an ordinance, but because of attrition. The bells fall silent because the human infrastructure that supported their voice has collapsed. This silence is perhaps the most terrifying sound of all. It is the sound of societal breakdown, the sound of the plague's final chilling victory over the rituals of human life and death. You sit in your house, straining to hear a sound that isn't there, and the silence seems to press in on you, heavier than any bronze bell. In the face of seemingly inescapable death and the collapse of familiar structures, human behavior splinters into desperate extremes. Some surrender entirely to the appetites of the moment, believing that if death is coming, they might as well meet it drunk. Taverns, paradoxically, might remain busy, filled with people seeking oblivion in cheap wine, their laughter loud and brittle. Houses whose owners have died or fled are broken into, their wine cellars raided. Impromptu feasts erupt, fueled by a desperate, nihilistic gaiety. You hear the sounds of these revels echoing through the otherwise silent streets at night, the discordant music, the shouts, the breaking of glass. It is the sound of people dancing on the edge of the abyss. Others react with the opposite extreme, a fervent, almost hysterical piety. The belief that the plague is God's punishment fuels a desperate search for atonement. The most dramatic manifestation of this is the flagellant movement. Groups of men, sometimes women too, travel from town to town, clad only in loincloths, their faces hooded or smeared with ash. They process through the streets in double file, chanting hymns and prayers, and rhythmically whipping themselves and each other with knotted leather scourges, often tipped with iron barbs. Their backs become raw, bloody messes. They believe that by inflicting this suffering upon themselves, they can take the sins of the community onto their own shoulders, appeasing God's wrath and halting the plague. Their arrival in a town is a disturbing spectacle, a mixture of religious fervour, mass hysteria, and public self-mutilation. While initially welcomed by some, their extreme practices and their tendency to challenge church authority soon lead them to be condemned as heretics. Their desperate penance, like the desperate revelry, does nothing to stop the relentless march of the disease. And then there is the search for someone else to blame. In times of inexplicable catastrophe, fear often curdles into hatred, seeking a tangible target for its rage. The vulnerability and otherness of Jewish communities, already subject to centuries of prejudice and persecution in Christian Europe, make them an obvious target. The old, poisonous lie resurfaces. The Jews are poisoning the wells. They are in league with dark forces, deliberately spreading the pestilence to destroy Christendom. This accusation flies in the face of logic. Jews are dying from the plague at the same rate as Christians, but logic has little power against mass hysteria fueled by terror. Across Europe, from France and Spain to the German lands, horrific violence erupts. You hear stories from travelling merchants, or perhaps you witness it in your own town. Mobs, often incited by rumours or extremist preachers, attack the Jewish quarters. Homes are looted, synagogues burned, people are dragged into the streets. Reframing the violence, you see the aftermath, the smoking ruins of buildings, the fearful silence of a once vibrant neighbourhood, Christian townspeople looking away with expressions of shame or cold indifference. You see the authorities standing by, perhaps wringing their hands, perhaps quietly complicit. The plague reveals not only the fragility of human life, but the fragility of human decency. The fear of death becomes a license for murder, sanctioned by superstition and ancient hatreds. The silence of the church bells is replaced by the roar of the mob and the crackle of flames. You withdraw further into the sanctuary of your home. The world outside has become too dangerous, too unpredictable. Your focus narrows to the simple, desperate goal of keeping your family alive. You enforce strict rules. No one leaves the house unless absolutely necessary. Any supplies brought in, a sack of precious flour, a few wizened vegetables, are left outside the door for a time, perhaps washed with vinegar, before being brought inside. You maintain a constant fire in your hearth, burning juniper or other strong-smelling herbs, clinging to the belief that smoke purifies the air. You pray constantly, your prayers a mixture of supplication and desperate bargaining. Food, once taken for granted, becomes an obsession. The breakdown of trade and agriculture means shortages are severe. The grain stores are dwindling. Even if you have money, and your wool business has completely collapsed, leaving you with dwindling reserves, there is often little to buy. Prices for basic necessities like bread, salt, and oil reach astronomical levels. Hoarding becomes rampant. Those with reserves guard them jealously. Malnutrition weakens the population further, making them even more susceptible to the disease. You carefully ration your family's remaining supplies, each meal a calculation of survival. Hunger gnaws at your belly, a constant dull ache that mirrors the gnawing fear in your heart. Time loses its familiar structure. Without the regular ringing of the church bells marking the hours of work and prayer, the days blur together. Confined to your house, the passage of time is marked only by the movement of the sun across your small patch of sky, and by the relentless cycle of fear and hope. You listen constantly for sounds from the street, the rumble of the death cart, a cry of mourning, or perhaps silence. Silence is ambiguous. Does it mean the worst is over? Or does it mean there is simply no one left to make noise? You find yourself marking the days by scratching lines on the wall, a prisoner counting down a sentence of unknown length. You try to maintain routines, shared meals, simple chores, to preserve a semblance of normalcy, a fragile bulwark against the encroaching chaos and despair that threaten to swallow you whole. You tell stories to your younger relatives, ancient tales of heroes and saints, hoping to offer comfort, distraction, or perhaps just to hear the sound of a human voice that isn't weeping or praying. Then the plague enters your own home. It comes silently, insidiously. Your eldest relative, a strong male figure who has been the bedrock of your family, complains of a sudden chill, a weariness that goes beyond simple fatigue. By evening, the fever is raging. You see the telltale signs, the unnatural flush on his skin, the slight tremor in his hands, the glassiness in his eyes. You recognize the scent of the sickness, a strange, sweetish odor that seems to cling to the air around him. The dread is immediate, absolute. You know, with a sickening certainty, what is coming. Yet you fight. You employ every remedy you know, every folk cure whispered by neighbours, every prayer you can remember. You bathe his forehead with cool water. You force him to drink herbal infusions. You apply poultices to the swellings that inevitably appear, hard and dark beneath his arm. Select a priest is unavailable, or perhaps unwilling to come. You rely on your own desperate faith. You hold the crucifix before his eyes, urging repentance, offering prayers for mercy. He becomes delirious, muttering incomprehensible fragments, his eyes staring at unseen terrors. The dark spots, the tokens, small hemorrhages under the skin, begin to appear on his chest and arms, the final, undeniable signature of the plague. The struggle is brief. Within 2 days of the first symptom, his breathing grows shallow, ragged, a final shuddering sigh, and then stillness. The silence in the room is deafening, broken only by the sudden ragged outburst of your own grief. The pain of loss is sharp, overwhelming, but the grim necessity of survival overrides even the deepest sorrow. The body, it is now a source of danger to the rest of you. It cannot remain. With heavy hearts, you and another adult male relative perform the final, terrible duty. You wash the body as best you can, perhaps anointing it with what little precious oil you have left. You wrap it tightly in a clean linen shroud, a final act of love and respect in a world stripped bare of ceremony. Waiting for darkness feels like an eternity. Under the cloak of a moonless night, you carry the shrouded form out of the house. The streets are empty, silent. You move like thieves, carrying your terrible burden. You reach the designated corner, a place now marked by the lingering scent of death and decay. Other small bundles lie there already, anonymous casualties awaiting collection. You gently lay your relative down among them. You cannot bring yourself to simply leave. You stand for a moment, perhaps murmuring a final broken prayer. Then, the distant rumble of the cart approaches. You turn and flee back to the relative safety of your home, tears streaming down your face, not daring to look back. You scrub your hands, your arms, your face, feeling contaminated, not just by disease, but by the brutal necessities of this time. You return to your surviving family, huddled together in fear. You have done what you had to do. You have survived another day. But the cost is unbearable. The house feels colder, emptier. and the silence outside seems to echo the silence within your own hollowed-out heart. But then, almost imperceptibly at first, something changes. It begins not with a grand announcement, but with a lessening. The death cart passes your street, and its load seems lighter. The unnatural silence of the days is punctuated by more sounds of normal life, a blacksmith's hammer, the cry of a street vendor, and then you hear it, from the tower of Saint Michel, a single, slow, solitary toll. Dong! A pause. Dong! The passing bell, just one, for one person, not the frantic chorus of panic, not the terrifying silence of collapse, but the old, familiar, mournful sound of a single soul departing. It rings out, clear and resonant in the still air. And it is the most beautiful, most hopeful sound you have ever heard. Slowly, tentatively, like plants pushing up through scorched earth, life begins to return to the town. The plague has not vanished entirely. It will return in smaller, localized outbreaks for centuries, but the first, devastating wave has passed. You cautiously unbar your door. You step out into the sunlight. The streets are emptier, quieter than before, but they are alive. You see familiar faces, gaunt, changed, but survivors. There are nods, quiet greetings, a shared understanding of having passed through the fire. The market slowly reopens. Though many stalls remain shuttered, their owners gone forever. Farmers, cautiously, begin to bring their produce back into town. The basic rhythms of commerce, of daily life, begin to reassert themselves. The town is scarred, profoundly altered. Perhaps a third of the people you knew are gone. The physical landscape is dotted with empty houses, overgrown gardens. The psychological landscape is forever changed. You see it in people's eyes. A lingering shadow of fear, a deeper appreciation for the fragility of life. Faith has been tested, warped. Some survivors dedicate themselves to the church with renewed fervour, funding new chapels, commissioning artworks depicting the horrors they witnessed. Others harbour a quiet resentment, a disillusionment with a God who allowed such suffering, or with a church that offered no effective protection. New cults emerge, focusing on personal piety or mystical experience. The danse macabre becomes a popular artistic motif, skeletons dancing with popes, kings, merchants and peasants, a stark reminder of death's impartiality. But amidst the grief and trauma, there are also unexpected shifts. The massive loss of life has created a sudden, acute labour shortage. Serfs find their feudal bonds weakened. They can demand better conditions, or simply leave their manors for towns offering higher wages. Guilds struggle to maintain their monopolies as skilled artisans become rare and valuable. You, Guillaume, the wool merchant, find your own business transformed. The demand for luxury woolens has perhaps decreased, but the cost of labour, shearers, spinners, weavers, has risen dramatically. Land prices may have fallen. Opportunities exist for those with the capital and the nerve to adapt to this new, emptier world. The Black Death was a catastrophe, but it was also, unintentionally, a catalyst for profound economic and social change, accelerating the decline of the old feudal order and paving the way for a different future. You stand in the square one afternoon, listening. The bells of Saint Michel ring out, marking the hour of nones. The sound is strong, clear, reassuring. It speaks of order, of routine, of the enduring presence of faith. But you hear it differently now. You hear the echoes of the frantic tolling, the memory of the silence. The bells still mark the time, but they also mark a rupture in time, a moment when the world tilted on its axis. They are no longer just the voice of God. They are the voice of history, holding within their bronze resonance the memory of terror, the quiet ache of loss, and the resilient, enduring heartbeat of human survival. The church bells, the ubiquitous soundtrack of medieval life, became unwilling chroniclers of the Black Death, their changing rhythms, from the steady beat of daily life to the frantic tolling of mass death, to the chilling silence of societal collapse, and finally back to the tentative rhythm of recovery, mirrored the terrifying passage of the plague through European society. They were instruments of faith that became instruments of fear, their familiar voices twisted into a constant, maddening reminder of mortality. The trauma of that sound and the trauma of the silence that followed echoed for generations, shaping the art, the religion, and the social structures of a world forever changed by the invisible tide of pestilence. The bells endured, but their song would never be quite the same again. They remain, even today, resonant symbols of community, of time, and of the profound human need to mark, measure, and ultimately find meaning in the face of overwhelming loss. The grim existence of a medieval peasant. We're journeying back to the heart of the Middle Ages, not to the glittering tournaments of knights or the hallowed halls of monasteries, but down to the muddy fields and smoky huts that house the vast majority of the population. We're here to look at the grim, short, and incredibly difficult existence of the medieval peasant. If you've stayed with me through this first story, I'm glad it's brought you a moment of peace. If you'd like to help this little community of ours keep growing, a simple like or subscribe is always appreciated, and I'd still love to know where you're listening from. It's been wonderful seeing voices from all over the world join in. We sometimes have this vague pastoral image of peasant life, simple folk living in harmony with nature, perhaps enjoying merry village festivals. But the brutal reality for most peasants, particularly serfs, was a life precariously balanced on the edge of starvation. It was an existence defined by relentless, back-breaking labour, crushing obligations to a lord, constant vulnerability to disease and violence, and a profound lack of freedom or opportunity. Think less charming countryside B&B, more soul-crushing agricultural labour camp. The year is 1315. The place is a small, insignificant manor village in the English Midlands. You are Thomas, a villain, a serf, and the sun is not yet up. Your world is small, bounded by the familiar landmarks of your manor. The lord's imposing stone manor house on the low hill, the small, sturdy stone church, the watermill by the sluggish river, and the vast open fields that stretch out around the cluster of huts that make up your village. You have likely never travelled more than 10 miles from this spot in your entire life. Your existence is tied, legally and practically, to this land. You were born here, like your father before you, and his father before him. You are not a slave, exactly. You cannot be bought and sold individually, but you are not free. You are bound to the soil. You belong to the manor, and the manor belongs to the Lord Baron Fitzalan. You wake in darkness, not to the sound of a bell, but to the familiar internal clock of agricultural necessity and the insistent nudging of your wife, Agnes. The floor of your hut is cold, damp earth beneath your bare feet. The air inside is thick with the lingering smoke from last night's meagre fire and the close animal smell of, well, animals. Your single-room dwelling, perhaps 15 by 20 feet, constructed of rough timber framing filled with wattle and daub, a mixture of woven branches, mud, straw and dung, is shared not just with your wife and 2 small surviving relatives, but often, during the coldest nights, with your precious pig or a few chickens huddled in a corner for warmth. Sanitation facilities consist of a bucket in the corner or a trip out back. Privacy is a concept as alien as reading. Agnes is already moving, rekindling the embers in the central hearth. A simple depression in the floor from which smoke hopefully finds its way out through a hole in the thatched roof, though much of it prefers to linger, stinging your eyes and coating everything in a layer of greasy soot. Your breakfast is predictable. A chunk of coarse, dark bread made from rye or barley. Wheat bread is a luxury for the Lord's table. Perhaps washed down with some weak, home-brewed ale, which is often safer to drink than the water from the village well. Or maybe just some pottage. A perpetual bland stew of oats or peas simmered over the fire, occasionally enlivened with a scrap of bacon fat or a wild herb. It's fuel, not pleasure. Enough calories to get you through the morning's labour. You pull on your simple clothes, a rough woolen tunic, leggings tied with twine, maybe some crude leather shoes or clogs. Though often you work barefoot, you step out into the pre-dawn chill. The air smells of damp earth, wood smoke, and manure. The village is stirring. Other families emerge from their identical huts, shadows moving in the grey light. You gather your tools, a heavy wooden hoe, perhaps a sickle. Today is not your day to work your own small strips of land in the village's open fields. Today, you owe the Lord. Your status as a villain comes with a heavy burden of obligations. The most demanding of these is the corvée, or week work. You are required to work a set number of days each week, typically 2 or 3, on the Lord's domain, his private land, the produce of which goes directly to his own table or market. This is unpaid labour, the rent you pay for the right to exist on his land and cultivate your own small holding. Today, the Lord's reeve, the manor supervisor, often a fellow peasant promoted to the uncomfortable position of enforcing the rules, has decreed that the task is ploughing the Lord's lower field, preparing it for the spring planting. You trudge towards the Demen fields, joining a silent, grim-faced procession of your neighbours. You arrive at the edge of a vast, muddy expanse. Waiting there is the manor's most valuable piece of agricultural technology, the heavy wheeled plough, the karuka, pulled by a team of 8 enormous, slow-moving oxen. This machine is essential for turning the heavy clay soil of your region, but it is far too expensive for any individual peasant to own. It belongs to the manor, and its use is strictly controlled. Your job today is twofold. Some men will guide the oxen, using long goads and shouted commands. Others, like you, will walk alongside the plough, wrestling with its heavy wooden handles, trying to keep the iron ploughshare cutting a straight, deep furrow through the resistant earth. The work is brutal, soul-destroying. The plough bucks and lurches as it hits stones or thick roots. You must throw your entire weight against the handles to keep it steady, your feet slipping and sliding in the thick mud. The oxen move at a glacial pace, their breath misting in the cold air. Your muscles scream in protest. Your hands are rubbed raw by the rough wood. You move back and forth across the field, yard by painful yard, leaving a trail of dark, turned earth behind you. There is no conversation, only the rhythmic creak of the plough, the heavy breathing of men and beasts, the sharp commands of the reeve, and the occasional, heart-stopping crack as the ploughshare strikes a hidden rock. You work until the sun is high in the sky, pause for a meagre midday meal of bread and ale brought out to the field, then work again until the light begins to fail. There is no clock, only the sun and the demands of the task. By the time the reeve finally calls a halt, you are coated in mud, your body throbbing with exhaustion, your mind numb. You have spent 10 hours or more toiling on land that is not yours, for a harvest you will not share, simply to fulfill your obligation. You stumble back towards the village, the setting sun casting long shadows across the newly ploughed field. It looks fertile, ready, but the satisfaction is muted by the knowledge that this fertility belongs to another, and tomorrow you will likely be back doing it all again. Your obligations to Lord Fitzalan do not end with the week work. Oh no. The feudal system is a masterpiece of meticulously layered exploitation, ensuring a constant flow of resources from the bottom to the top. In addition to the regular labour dues, there are the boon works. These are extra days of work required during the busiest times of the agricultural year, ploughing season, planting season, and especially harvest time. When the Lord's grain is ripe, his entire workforce, every able-bodied man, woman, and older relation on the manor, must drop everything and report to his fields to bring in the harvest. Failure to appear can result in heavy fines or other punishments. Your own small harvest might be rotting in your strips while you sweat under the sun cutting the Lord's wheat. It's incredibly efficient for the Lord, ensuring his valuable crop is gathered quickly. For you, it's just another layer of resentment. Then there are the taxes, paid not in coin, which you rarely possess, but in kind. You owe the Lord a certain portion of your own harvest, perhaps 1/10 of your grain, delivered to his granary. You owe him chickens at Easter, eggs at Michaelmas. You might owe him a heriot tax when your father dies, the forfeit of your best beast, likely your only ox, to the Lord before you can inherit the family holding. This often crippling tax could plunge a family into destitution, forcing them deeper into debt or dependence. It's like inheritance tax, but instead of money, they take your only tractor. And the fees. The Lord owns the essential infrastructure of the manor, and you must pay for the privilege of using it. You need to grind your grain into flour. You must take it to the Lord's mill and pay the miller, the Lord's man, a portion of your flour, known as the mulcher. The miller is widely suspected of taking more than his fair share, his thumb notoriously heavy on the scale, but complaining is useless. Need to bake your bread? You must use the Lord's communal oven. Private ovens are often forbidden as a fire hazard, and conveniently, as a way to ensure the fee is collected. Again, you pay the Lord's baker, perhaps a loaf out of every dozen. Want to press your few grapes or apples into wine or cider? You must use the Lord's press and pay the Lord's due. It's a relentless system of microtransactions, ensuring that a significant portion of everything you produce flows inevitably upwards. Your life is governed by 1,000 small, unavoidable tolls on the road to survival. Even your personal life is subject to the Lord's control. Want to marry someone from another manor? You must seek the Lord's permission and pay a fee, the mercies, because he's losing a potential labourer. Want your older male relative to inherit your land when you die? Subject to the Lord's approval and the heriot. Want to send a younger male relative to the nearby town to become an apprentice craftsman? Forbidden, unless you pay a hefty fine to compensate the Lord for the loss of future labour. You are tied to the land, and the Lord controls the land. Therefore, he controls you. Your life is circumscribed by his needs, his rules, his economic interests. Freedom is a distant, almost unimaginable concept. Your world is the manor, and the manor's world revolves around the Lord. Life inside your small hut is cramped, dark, and smoky. There are no windows, perhaps just small, unglazed openings with wooden shutters to keep out the worst of the wind and rain. Light comes from the open doorway during the day, and from the central hearth fire, which burns almost constantly, filling the single room with a perpetual haze. Your eyes are always slightly irritated, your lungs constantly breathing in wood smoke. Respiratory problems are endemic. The floor is packed earth, perhaps covered with a layer of straw or rushes that are changed infrequently. This floor covering harbours dirt, fleas, lice, and the residue of spilled food and animal waste. Hygiene is rudimentary. Furnishings are minimal and homemade. A rough wooden table, perhaps a couple of stools. Your bed is likely a raised platform covered with a straw-filled mattress shared by the entire family for warmth. Blankets are coarse wool, often scratchy and likely harbouring more unwelcome guests. Clothes are few, perhaps 2 tunics per person, one for daily wear, one for special occasions, like attending church, washed infrequently in the nearby stream with harsh lye soap. Pottery is simple, earthenware, easily broken and likely chipped. Utensils might include a few wooden spoons, maybe a single shared knife. Life is lived at a basic, functional level, with little room for comfort or personal possessions beyond the absolutely essential. Your diet is monotonous and nutritionally marginal, heavily reliant on whatever grains you can grow or are given as rations. Pottage is the staple, a thick porridge-like stew made from oats, barley or peas, boiled endlessly over the hearth. Sometimes vegetables from your small garden plot, onions, cabbage, turnips, might be added. Meat is a rare luxury. Your pig, if you have one, is likely slaughtered in the autumn, its meat carefully salted and smoked to last through the winter. Chickens provide eggs, another valuable source of protein. Hunting in the Lord's forest is strictly forbidden. Poaching game like deer or rabbit carries severe penalties, potentially even death. You might occasionally catch small birds or fish from the river, but your diet is overwhelmingly carbohydrate-based. It provides calories, but often lacks essential vitamins and minerals. Malnutrition is a constant, low-level reality. Winter is the hardest time. The days are short, the nights are long and bitterly cold. The work in the fields lessens, but the struggle for survival intensifies. Keeping the fire going is crucial, requiring a constant supply of firewood, which you are only allowed to gather from specific areas of the Lord's woods, taking only fallen branches, never cutting down live trees. Food stores dwindle. The salted meat runs low. By late winter, the period known as the hungry gap before the first spring growth, many families are on the brink of starvation, surviving on stored grain and whatever edible roots they can forage. The cold seeps into your small hut, chilling you to the bone despite the smoky fire. Disease thrives in the damp, crowded conditions. The winter survival rate, especially for the very young and the old, is grim. Spring cannot come soon enough. Despite the hardships, your life is not one of total isolation. The village provides a strong, if often stifling, sense of community. You know everyone, and everyone knows you. Your neighbours are also your relatives, your co-workers in the fields, your fellow worshippers at the Sunday Mass. Life is lived publicly. Secrets are hard to keep. Gossip is a major form of entertainment and social control. The community works together during peak times, like harvest. They celebrate together during the major religious festivals, Christmas, Easter, Pentecost, which provide rare and welcome holidays from the endless toil. These might involve a special church service, perhaps a feast provided by the Lord, ale, bread, maybe even some roasted meat, followed by music, dancing, and rough village games. The church is the absolute centre of village life, both spiritually and socially. The small stone building is likely the only permanent, well-constructed structure aside from the manor house. Its bells mark the hours. Its priest baptizes your infants, marries your relatives, and buries your dead. Sunday Mass is compulsory. It is a place of genuine faith, offering solace and the promise of a better life in the hereafter. But it is also an instrument of social control. The priest, appointed by the Lord or a nearby monastery, preaches sermons emphasizing obedience, acceptance of one's place in the God-given hierarchy, and the importance of paying your tithes, a tenth of your produce, to the church. The fear of God's wrath and the threat of excommunication, being cast out from the community of faith, are powerful tools for maintaining order. Within the village hierarchy, there is the reeve, often a villain himself, chosen by the Lord or his steward for his reliability or perhaps his intimidating presence. The reeve is the manor's foreman and enforcer. He is responsible for organising the daily work on the Lord's domain, ensuring everyone shows up on time, measuring the amount of work done, collecting fines for transgressions. It is a difficult and unpopular position. He is caught between the demands of the Lord and the resentment of his fellow peasants. He might enjoy certain privileges, a slightly larger landholding perhaps, but he also bears the brunt of the village's frustrations. You try to stay on his good side, doing your work diligently, avoiding trouble, but you also know he is watching you, counting your chickens, measuring your grain, the Lord's eyes and ears in your small world. Your world is bounded by the manor's edge. News from the outside world arrives slowly, distorted by rumour and travellers' tales. You might hear of wars in France, of crusades in the Holy Land, of the death of a king or the election of a pope. But these events feel distant, abstract, largely irrelevant to the immediate, pressing realities of your daily life. The weather, the harvest, the state of your ox's health, the reeve's mood. Your horizons are limited. Your concerns are intensely local. You understand your place in the great chain of being. God above, the King far away, the Lord closer and much more tangible. And you, at the bottom, holding it all up. Literacy is an unimaginable skill, possessed only by the priest and perhaps the Lord's steward. Your knowledge is practical, oral, passed down through generations. How to read the sky for weather, how to mend a fence, how to soothe a sick animal, the words to the prayers, the verses of the old songs. It is a rich but profoundly circumscribed universe. Life is fragile. Death is a constant familiar presence. One of the greatest threats is hunger. Medieval agriculture is precarious, utterly dependent on the weather. A drought in the spring, too much rain at harvest time, an early frost. Any of these can devastate the crops. Even in a good year, yields are low, perhaps only 3 or 4 grains harvested for every one sown. There is little surplus. Food storage techniques are rudimentary. Grain stored in damp pits or chests is vulnerable to rats, mould and insects. A single bad harvest can mean a winter of desperate hunger. 2 bad harvests in a row can mean widespread famine. You have lived through lean times. You know the gnawing ache of an empty belly, the weakness in your limbs. You have seen neighbours waste away, seen younger relatives succumb to hunger-related diseases. The fear of starvation is a constant low-level hum beneath the surface of everyday life. Disease is an even more constant companion. Your village lacks any concept of sanitation. Waste is thrown into the street or onto dung heaps near the houses. Water from the well is often contaminated. People live in close proximity to their animals. Minor infections, which would be easily treatable today, can quickly become fatal. A cut from a sickle festering in the dirt can lead to amputation or death. Childbirth is incredibly dangerous for both mother and infant. Infant and child mortality rates are appallingly high. Perhaps half of all children born do not survive to adulthood. You and Agnes have likely buried several young relatives, their small graves marked by simple wooden crosses in the churchyard. Life expectancy is short. If you survive childhood diseases and accidents, you might live into your 40s or 50s, your body worn out by a lifetime of labour and poor nutrition. Death is not a distant event. It is woven into the fabric of your daily existence. Beyond the natural threats of hunger and disease, there is the human threat of violence and injustice. You live under the Lord's law, dispensed in the manor court, often presided over by his steward. Justice is arbitrary, heavily biased towards the Lord's interests. Disputes between peasants might be settled relatively fairly, perhaps through fines or public apologies. But a dispute between a peasant and the Lord is no dispute at all. The Lord's word is final. Poaching on his land, failing to perform labour dues, speaking disrespectfully to the reeve, all can result in harsh punishments. Heavy fines that plunge you into debt, confiscation of your precious livestock, or time spent in the village stocks, a target for public ridicule and rotten vegetables. Then there is the threat of external violence. Though your manor might seem peaceful, the wider world is often at war. Your lord owes military service to his own overlord, perhaps the king himself. When the call comes, he might levy a troop of soldiers from the manor. Sometimes this involves professional men-at-arms, but often peasants like you are conscripted as foot soldiers or archers. You're given rudimentary training, perhaps a padded jacket and a simple spear or bow, and marched off to fight in a war you barely understand, in a place you have never heard of. Your chances of returning are uncertain. You might fall in battle, or more likely succumb to disease in the squalid conditions of a military camp. Your absence places an even greater burden on your family back home. Your lord fights for glory and land. You fight because you have no choice. Bandits and outlaws are another threat, preying on travellers or isolated farmsteads, though the communal nature of village life offers some protection. Still, the world beyond the manor boundaries feels unsafe, unpredictable. Are there any moments of respite, any glimmers of hope in this grim existence? Yes, but they are small, hard-won, and often fleeting. The religious calendar provides structure and meaning, and the major feast days, Christmas, Easter, Whitsun, various saints' days, are genuine holidays. Work stops, usually for a day or two. There might be a special church service, perhaps involving music and incense. The Lord might provide a feast, an occasion for rare indulgence in meat and strong ale. Villagers gather on the green for dancing, wrestling, archery contests, and rough folk games. These communal celebrations are vital, a chance to reaffirm social bonds, to release pent-up frustrations, and to simply experience joy in a life largely defined by toil. Small acts of agency exist. While bound to the soil, you are not entirely without rights. Manorial custom, developed over generations, provides some protection against the Lord's most arbitrary demands. You have the right to cultivate your allotted strips of land, to graze your animals on the common pasture, though the number might be limited, to gather firewood in the Lord's forest. These rights are jealously guarded, passed down through oral tradition. You might even participate in the manor court, perhaps as a juror in minor disputes between fellow villagers, having a small say in the administration of local justice. It's not democracy, but it's a flicker of participation. Over generations, families might slowly improve their situation by clearing new land from the forest or marsh, a process called assarting. You might be granted slightly better terms for that new land, perhaps paying a fixed cash rent instead of labour dues. Or you might save enough over many years to buy your freedom from the Lord, becoming a freeman, though this is rare and expensive. These small shifts, these incremental gains accumulated over centuries, represent a slow, almost glacial movement towards greater autonomy. But for you, Thomas, living in 1315, these are distant possibilities. Your reality is the heavy plough, the empty granary in spring, the reeve's demanding voice, and the small smoky hut you call home. You are old now, perhaps 45. Your back is permanently stooped from a lifetime spent bending over the earth. Your hands are gnarled like old roots. Your teeth are mostly gone, worn down by the grit in your coarse bread. You watch your own adult male relatives, their bodies still strong, performing the same tasks you did 30 years ago, following the same plough, working the same strips of land, paying the same dues to the same Lord's successor. The seasons turn, the cycle continues. Spring planting gives way to summer growing, then autumn harvest, then the long cold winter. The bells of Saint Michel still mark the hours, the years flowing one into the next, largely indistinguishable. Your world has remained small, your life defined by the relentless demands of subsistence agriculture and the rigid structure of feudalism. You have known hardship, hunger, loss. You have also known the simple satisfactions of a successful harvest, the warmth of your hearth fire on a cold night, the shared laughter during a village festival, the deep, unquestioning bonds of family and community. You have endured. That, perhaps, is the defining characteristic of your existence. Endurance. You are not a character in a romance. You are not a revolutionary dreaming of a different world. You are a medieval peasant. Your life etched into the soil of your manor, your story largely unwritten, unheard. The grim existence of the medieval peasant, particularly the serf, was the bedrock upon which the entire glittering edifice of the Middle Ages was built. Their relentless, often unrewarded labour fed the knights, the lords, the priests, the kings. Their rents and taxes funded the castles, the cathedrals, the crusades. They were the vast, silent majority, living lives that were, by our standards, incredibly hard, short, and constrained. They had little freedom, few rights, and were constantly vulnerable to forces beyond their control, weather, disease, war, the whims of their lords. Yet their lives were not devoid of meaning or dignity. They possessed immense practical knowledge, a deep connection to the land and its rhythms. They built strong communities, sustained by shared faith and mutual obligation. They endured unimaginable hardships with a stoicism born of necessity. The romanticized image of the merry peasant bears little resemblance to the brutal reality. But the equally simplistic image of the peasant as a miserable, downtrodden victim also misses the quiet resilience, the deep-rooted traditions, and the essential foundational role they played in shaping the world that came after them. They were the forgotten engine of their age, their lives a long, slow, and profoundly human struggle for survival against the unyielding realities of their time.